Hello and welcome back. I am Alyssa Ray, Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain.Life, and this is the Week in Sustainability, where a group of our practitioners come together to deliver to you the most topical sustainability news of the week. So I am joined today by my colleague, Hannah Asofsky, a data analyst on our sustainability team. Welcome and hello, Hannah.
Hey, so we were really zoomed in on France last week. And this week we're going to zoom out and talk about some stuff happening on a much higher level in sustainability. You'll walk us through some highlights of Davos that completed earlier in the month, but I am going to kick us off a little bit closer to home, at least our home. And
Sounds
so
great.
we'll be talking about the United States carbon emissions, which did sadly increase by 1.3% in 2022, according to Rhodium's latest analysis. This 1% is lower than the 6% increase we saw in 2021 as the country tried to bounce back from COVID. But again, as long as that slope is positive, it's heading in the wrong direction. That increase is mostly explained by the continued use of natural gas. I think we often talk about natural gas as like a lower carbon alternative to coal, but I think that that should be raising little like greenwashing flags for everyone. Sure, burning natural gas does emit less carbon than coal, but it's absolutely still a carbon intense fossil fuel. And the comparison that talks about sort of natural gas being a better alternative than coal is only talking about burning the two of them. It's ignoring the fact that natural gas is a completely methanogenic gas. And so burning it is cleaner, but methane leaks in extraction and transport processes are incredibly detrimental. And so we still need to see natural gas replaced by renewables in the not so long term. And there is some good news that came out of Rhodium's analysis. So while natural gas is still increasing, renewables successfully overtook coal for the first time in decades. And we can confidently bet on this staying the case. Like I said, coal has been declining for a while, and we're constantly being bombarded with evidence that renewables are getting cheaper and getting better all the time. And lastly, in 2022, we did see the economic growth outpace emissions growth. Overall, that means that the economy is becoming less carbon intense. And I think on a conceptual level, it's really important to show the American public that economic growth can be decoupled from fossil fuel use. Way back in 2019, we saw that the GDP grew and emissions fully decreased. So 2019 was almost a better year than 2022. But I think the further out from COVID that we get, the more we're going to collect evidence that the most sort of stable economic future is a decarbonized one.
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting point that you bring up. We talk a lot in the application about emissions intensities and emission intensity activities and things like that. But that's a big win that our activities in the US as a whole have been becoming less emission intensive, even if the absolute emissions, as we refer to them, have not gone down.
Absolutely. It's a good, like, we're headed in the right direction. We just need to get there faster.
All right, take the small wins where we can, right?
Totally.
All right. Well, the story that I want to talk about this week is just a high level wrap up and overview of the WEF conference in Davos that wrapped earlier this month. A reminder to our readers about what this is, or an introduction if you're unaware. This is the annual gathering of the world's wealthiest and most influential, the movers and the shakers, so to speak, to discuss really critical issues that shape the global economy. This past 2023 conference was the 53rd annual meeting. And this is really a public private partnership that takes a really multi-systemic approach to understanding and addressing both the acute but also long-term issues that impact economic stability at large. And you'll remember a couple weeks ago on this very podcast, we talked about the WEF risk report that was released ahead of the conference. And so this is really where all the movers and shakers get together to discuss those issues, challenges, and strategic pathways forward. So the agenda focused on four main pillars. I won't go too deep, but it was basically in depth conversations on energy and the food crisis and how to develop sustainable infrastructure and investment that meets and addresses both of those crises while also meeting our 2030 climate goals. And it talks about conventional economic issues, things like high inflation and low growth and the high debt economy that we have in a post COVID world, impact on supply chains and global trade. There's a third pillar around technologies and how really the fourth industrial revolution that we're in and really the transformation of industry in modern society. And then there's a whole pillar around social vulnerabilities. So things like labor markets and wages, cost of living increase, a lot of those real stressors that we feel in our everyday life, and how to balance that against basic human needs like education and skill development and healthcare, which all go to future proof economies. So, just a couple takeaways from the conference. There were a couple of alliances and initiatives formed. There was a group of philanthropies that got together and, kind of signed up to promote raising climate funds to meet the Paris Agreement goals. There was some activity with the Ocean Action Agenda, which is meant to stimulate demand for high quality blue carbon offsets, which further protect marine environments while also sequestering carbon in the ocean. And then WEF also announced this net zero approach, which is basically an attempt to accelerate the transition to net zero through regional partnerships across industries that basically link policy, finance, and technology to industry challenges. So, those are some of the details. But to me, frankly, what the most important takeaway of this conference is just the acknowledgement that these conversations are happening at such a multidisciplinary and systemic level, really acknowledging all the dynamics that underpin our global society. There are no more silos. And that is something that I think is really important to climate, because this is an issue that, for those of us that have been in this industry for a while, used to be siloed and oftentimes even conflict with other issues like those social vulnerabilities, like employment, like inflation or basic economic principles. And I think it is so massively important and significant to see world leaders shifting their perspective to interconnected systems. This is something we see in business, corporate world, that the silo of sustainability is breaking down, and to see that reflected in these global talks, I think, is really powerful and really meaningful. Yeah. And so just two clips that I want to encourage our listeners to check out. We will link them here, but if you want to get really fired up, or gave a really intense monologue on the urgency of climate action and the failure of oil and gas, if you're looking for an amp up, absolutely recommend that. And then for anyone looking for a high level overview of our Earth systems, the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Johan Rodstrom, gave a really interesting presentation on the tipping points of the various planetary systems that are basically on brink of disaster and will create not just a climate crisis, but a planetary crisis. So that's it. That's what we have for everyone this week. We will be back with you next week for another week in sustainability. And also, to those on the line, don't forget to join us for our webinar, Preparing for Third Party Assurance, that we are hosting on February 15th, where our team is going to take you through our new feature that we're launching that helps companies seeking emissions verification for voluntary reporting, as well as those that are looking for assurance for the financial grade disclosure for mandated reporting. We will link the Eventbrite invitation for that event here, so don't miss it. Thanks for joining us.